welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Hi, Rose.
Hello, Christine.
This is going to go out on May 1st, which means that it's been almost 2 months since the corona lockdown started. But today, we aren't going to talk about the coronavirus at all.
Oh, good. We get to take a break from one catastrophe to another.
So what are we talking about? What's our question?
Our question today is, what can we learn from watching Planet of the Humans?
It's the movie that's been out since Earth Day, I think maybe a day or two before, by director Jeff Gibbs, produced by the progressive heavyweight Michael Moore.
Right.
So it's getting a lot of attention, and I hadn't heard of it, but it was before Earth Day. I got a message from a mutual friend of ours going, I'm just devastated. You have to watch this movie. I'm devastated. I want to know what you think. And then another friend on Facebook tagged me the next day saying, I've just watched this movie. I'm horrified. That was a week ago. And now you and I have both seen it.
Several times. Yeah, and I have to say that I love Michael Moore. I think he's an important progressive voice, and Bowling for Columbine. I'm not going to remember all the names of the films he did. The one about the automobile industry. I mean, I think he has made some great statements and really got some discussion out there. So when people were tagging me, same thing. I hadn't had the opportunity to sit down and watch it. And yeah, then I watched it, and I watched the first 15 minutes, and I was like, I need some tequila. I gotta walk away from this. And then I watched like the next 15, and I was like, oh my God, this is just not feeling good at all. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And eventually, I watched it one time. I watched it in chunks and watched it one time through, and I was like, okay, I needed to take a step away, because it's a fairly devastating portrayal of what the clean energy economy, one man's journey about the clean energy industry, I guess.
Well, and so he starts off saying, basically proving his environmental cred, because he lived in a house off the grid in the wilds of Minnesota or something 30 years ago. But it was interesting by the time I watched it, I'd read critiques. So I was kind of prepared. But immediately I'm like, what? Who are the experts that he's talking to? Nobody I recognize. And not that I know everybody, but even when you look them up. So it's a bunch of white guys. Yeah, I don't know if you noticed that. No women.
There is one white woman talks about population control.
That's true. But mostly, a lot of his sound bites are just stopping people on the street and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Or talking to solar salesmen, again, a decade ago.
So I had to take time away. And then I was like, now that I've got space, can I do my own? Can I actually research who are these experts that he's talking to, so-called experts? Who is Jeff Gibbs, the director of the movie? Obviously he's attached himself to Michael Moore's street cred, but Gibbs was instrumental in working with him on Bowling for Columbine. So that doesn't get, but the fact that he's a filmmaker doesn't give him environmental cred. And then who is the other? There's a young man that wrote Green Illusions, Ozzy Zanner. His voice is in it a lot. So then I'm looking them up, and I come to realize that a, that back in 2012 under Gibbs's bio, he's talking then about making this movie. And so I'm like, okay, so he evidently shot a lot of this back in 2012, and then maybe
Before 2012.
20, well, then some more in 2015. And I'm like, okay, well, we know here's an interesting story that kind of puts it in perspective. When my son was going to, shout out to Connor, he hates me talking about him too, so sorry, honey. When he was going to get his degree in environmental engineering, he was looking at many different colleges, and some of the environmental programs were accredited, but UCSD's was not. And that was really worrisome to him and to his father, who's also an engineer. And when they went for their campus tour, they sat down and talked with the powers that be about the fact that UCSD's degree is not accredited. Well, it's not, because it changes on a daily basis. They're so cutting edge that what it takes to become accredited is stagnant. And so that kind of really plays into this as well. What's happening in environmental is changing on a daily basis. In renewable
That's
energy,
really
okay.
what he's focusing on is renewable energy. He's not looking at any other climate solutions, and I think that's important to say, because there are a lot of other climate solutions.
Okay, renewable energy is changing on a daily basis. What we know today, especially around the subject of biomass was considered like that was kind of the way things were going. Even Bill McKibben, who was a big proponent of biomass, and Middlebury College, which is where he's an adjunct professor in Vermont, when they were changing out their boilers, they changed them from coal-fired to biomass. And that was that was such a big thing, because the burning of wood was cleaner than the burning of coal. Okay.
This is back in 2009, a long time ago.
So my point is that the fact that we're learning from our mistakes, which is how humans learn, how we move forward. It's no different than a child figuring out how to walk. We're figuring out how to walk towards cleaner energy.
And we've never done this before, as collectively, as an economy, as a species. We've never done it before, and it's easy to take pot shots in hindsight. I think we should, though, rewind a little bit and just give a bit more of a synopsis. So he makes good points about biomass, right? He's basically biomass bad, really bad. And this is why it's bad. And look at the people who support it. Bill McKibben, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Al Gore. He takes, was it biomass he didn't attack Gore on, but for different reasons. Basically, attacking people who have been in the climate trenches for decades.
But isn't that, I mean, it's attacking people who are on the forefront does not help anyone. So the fact that most of this movie is archival footage, but it's presented as if it's today's reality, is very damaging. It's very damaging, and to present it to people who are really their hearts and minds and their life's work, to just like throw them under the bus because 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, even 6 months ago, they weren't smart enough to know what they didn't know. Well, who does? It's kind of ludicrous.
And what I'm concerned about is, obviously, people who've been fighting this fight for as long as McKibben and Gore and Robert Kennedy deserve better than they were treated in this film. But I'm actually really concerned because of the mixture of truth and misinformation in here, which frankly is how propaganda is. The better your propaganda, the more you mix in truth and fiction. And so there is some truth in this film, and it's mixed in with a whole lot of inaccurate and misleading information. And that's how you create propaganda when you mix truth and lies. I mean, it's true. Overconsumption is bad. And that's why everybody that he identifies in the film, Al Gore, Bill McKibben, everybody he throws under the bus, no, overconsumption is bad. You and I know overconsumption is bad. We use up the equivalent of 5 planets worth of resources every year as a species. That's not sustainable. And no climate activist would say that's a good thing.
I think you're right. And the fact that this film requires you to do so much additional reading to find out what's true and not true. Can we look at that and say, okay, this is where propaganda comes from? Can we learn the lesson from this film that yes, there's good, and yes, it's inordinately bad, but can we see how easily we can go down the rabbit hole of being knocked off of our foundation of what truth is? Because this is a lesson in it to me. This opens the gate for debate. This opens the door for debate about what are the things we need to be focusing on. And there's no exclusivity. I mean, the fact that overpopulation and consumption and economic growth, runaway economic growth, all of that comes into play. It's not an either or.
And again, I would say it seems he's decided his polemic is clean energy bad. I have some quotes. Okay, the merger of environmentalism and capitalism is now complete, as you know, so there's a polemic against money, against our system, and there are arguments to be made. Obviously, this system is failing the majority of people. The 1% are doing quite well, but he says, the argument seems to be if you're making any kind of money, even if it's with green initiatives, bad. That's bad. And the idea, I don't know, it brings up the Koch brothers as being involved in some renewable energy.
Well, and that to me was like, okay, there's the picture of the Koch brothers. Well, one of them's dead. I mean, that right there is like, hello.
I know.
They're not the Koch brothers anymore. They're the Koch brother.
But I mean, and they still are villains. And yeah, I think every climate activist knows that they're villains. But if they're actually doing renewable energy projects, and this is not how they're making their billions every year, but the idea that it's just bad because you just put up a picture of the Koch brothers, which, as you say, one of them's dead already. And then it's like you play this dark music and it's like, okay, right, bad. No, there's a system. We are working within this crappy system to make a better system. And the idea that you can just step right out of it and be pure. And now, of course, Mr. Gibbs never shows us how he's getting around in this movie to make all of this footage. Is he walking? Is he biking? Probably not. But that's okay because he's not turning the spotlight on himself. He's trying to show how hypocritical everybody else in the environmental movement is, all the big shots. So, you know.
So now there's over 3 million people who have watched it, and you know, and I think we also need to speak to the fact that it's on YouTube. It wasn't picked up by a distributor. It's not in a movie house. Not that any of us could be going to a movie house right now, but it's not on Netflix. It's not on Hulu. It's on YouTube. So I think that says something. It is out there and it's free for people to watch. 3 million people have watched it. Can we open the door to debate with these people who've watched it? How many of those people will actually sit by the sideline, you know, take it in and go, okay, I need to find out if this is true or not. And like you said, that's the danger, is that some people will just say, oh, well, Michael Moore, you know, and quite, you know, and I understand that, because I was like, okay, well, Michael Moore, his notoriety precedes him. He calls out people who need to be called out. He does like to be controversial, and I have the FU gene too, so I get it.
He checks that box.
Yes, he checks that box, and that's what I love about him. But at the same time, I think he did his reputation a disservice. and people hate people. There's probably just as many people who hate him as love him, but by assigning his name to this and promoting it, he's hurt his reputation as being a truth teller.
Right, because there's so much misinformation and it's easily disproved. Like, and we'll post articles which go into a whole lot more detail about the renewable energy projects that he's bashing, about why they're so outdated. And we won't really go into that here, but it's not even hard to disprove almost every claim he makes about how bad renewable energy is. I mean, basically he says fossil fuels and renewable energy, no difference. That's what he says in the movie, that you might as well just keep burning fossil fuels than having these renewable energy plants. And there is a whole discussion, an intelligent discussion to be had about, you still, when you make an electric car, you use up resources. How are we going to do that better? When you put up solar panels, you're going to be using up resources. How do we do that better? And it is getting better and better. But I just wonder what the point was. Was it just to stir the pot? Because I will tell you that Breitbart News, which our listeners may or may not know, is associated with Steve Bannon, who of course was in the Trump White House for a while. It's a right-wing, alt-right news source. They love this movie. There's climate deniers sharing it all over the place. They love it. Mm-hmm. So what was the point? And not even, I think we should talk about the movie's conclusion, which is, humans are like really bad. People have called this movie, have said that this movie is putting forth ecofascism, which is that humans are bad. Basically, we're beyond redemption. I have a quote here. Near the end, there's a shot of a red moon at night, and the narrator says, "The human presence is beyond sustainability and all that implies." And then they go on to talk about the one solution. This is not a solutions-based movie, folks. The one solution that they have, drum roll, what is it? Population control. So there's a bunch of white guys talking about.
Well, I do think that population control is not control, but I think that population, yes, but we need to look at the fact that the people who are over consuming, like especially us in North America, we were 4% of the world's population. We consume 25% of the world's resources or something. Okay, so yes, as where the overpopulation is coming is in the brown countries, and so there's this whole white patriarchy. We need to stop brown people from procreating.
Exactly. So that's an important. It's a nuanced conversation to have.
Well, there's so many components to it. Yes, the fact that the world is, there's now 7 billion, and by 2050 there's 10 billion. That has to be part of the conversation too. But it's not, like I said, it's not an either or. It's like all of these things in conjunction with each other. They all need to be part of the conversation.
Which brings us to Project Drawdown.
Exactly.
Because I mean, the top 10 solutions, there actually aren't any renewable energy solutions in the top 10. They're definitely in the top 100. But guess what is in the top 10, right? Number, I don't know. Is it number 7? Educating girls and women, which you don't have to population control by sterilizing people or forcing them to stop having babies when that's the way that their economy works.
Okay, but the hypocrisy of we don't want women to have control of their bodies, but yet we want population control. I feel like it's like I'm schizophrenic here.
Well, I think Michael Moore would probably say, hey, he's progressive on birth control and abortion. But the fact is, in this movie, no brown people. Were there any brown people? No experts, and no Indigenous people. shown almost entirely white, old, well, okay, maybe not old, but white.
It depends on how old. It depends on how old you are.
Yes, white males with one white female weighing in on pro-population control. So I just think we have to hold up Project Drawdown as such a contrast to this heavy-handed, biased, outdated movie. If you watched it and felt disheartened, please go to Project Drawdown. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But there are so many solutions. And even if you believe everything Gibbs says about renewable energy, even after listening to Rose and I talk about it, go to Project Drawdown, because there's so many other solutions. And it's not just about clean energy. That is so missing the point. So what else do we want to say about it? Somebody posted on Facebook about it. More or less an old blooper collection of anything wrong that ever happened in renewable energy. It's embarrassing, he said. And I would agree. I would actually say it's interesting because there's, you may not know, there's a race on for the leadership of the federal Green Party. Elizabeth May, who's been an amazing leader for 15 years at least. And she's smart as a whip, lawyer. She's got lots of street cred in the green department.
Well, I read her, and we can post this, her
take on it.
Scathing, yes.
Well, so I'm connected with at least one of the people who are running to replace her, and I have heard that he wants to take the Green Party of Canada way over to the left, way over. And he's my Facebook friend now, and he loves this movie. So that makes it easy. I'm not.
Wow.
Yeah. And he even wrote a blog about it, which we can post. I'm not going to mention his name here. I don't want to give him any more free PR, but people on his page were going like, what? And I have to say, so he likes the movie, not good critical thinking skills, buddy. And also he misspelled Michael Moore's name in the title of his blog. So not going to get my vote. But I do think, I don't know, have you heard of Patrick Moore?
I have not, no.
Okay. Well, he likes to pop up, and he has he had an early tie to Greenpeace, like way back when. He claims that he founded it, which is not true, but he was early on in some of the boats, and an environmentalist, and he's gone over to the dark side. Okay, I'm just in quotation marks, but he works for fossil fuel companies. And for years, he's been getting paid to talk about how bad, basically the green movement is, and how that climate change isn't happening and all of this stuff. So I do wonder if Michael Moore is channeling Patrick Moore just a little too much here. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, so my takeaway is, what can we learn from this? I guess that was the question. That we can learn that it's important to be up to date with your information. It's important to do your own research. Don't believe everything you read or see. We have to have critical thinking skills at this time more than ever. I mean, we're seeing it with the COVID-19. Not to be talking about that, but we're seeing how much false information there is out there. Don't believe something because a celebrity that you follow thinks something. Do your own thinking. And the good news is that Christine we'll put up a bunch of links to all the good things that are happening in clean energy to kind of counter everything that this film says. But the good news is that we do have the ability to do research, to read both sides, to see where the disinformation is coming from, and to counter that. It's not like the old days where you had to go to the library and look up in an encyclopedia. Now, information overload. Information is coming fast and furious. We need to. It's our personal responsibility to be able to distill that down.
I mean, the good news is that we can do the research. The bad news is it's so easy to spread misinformation.
Mhm.
But you're right. So we'll talk about in the good news, Sweden's shut down its last coal plant 2 years ahead of schedule. That's
Go
great
Sweden.
news. Yeah. And also this movement to, and again in the movie, he talks about shutting coal plants for natural gas plants is not a climate friendly option. Agreed. Totally agree. And so there's a movement to electrify everything and basically close. I think there's at least 30 cities and counties in California that have passed ordinances that require new buildings to be,
Electrified as
thank
opposed
you,
to gas.
electrified as
Yep.
opposed to gasified.
Mhm.
So yes, there's lots of good news out there. Are we out of the woods? No. Are we over consuming
Yes.
our detriment to the point where we can see that humanity is going to be wiped out in a decade if we don't smarten up? Yeah. So we can agree with this movie. Things are bad. We need to wake up, and hopefully, if you watch this movie, that's what you'll get out of it. That it's time to wake up, but it's not that dark. There are tens of thousands of millions of people around the world awakening and working for a livable future for our children and grandchildren and 7 generations. So that's the good news. And so the action item would be do your research. And don't believe and I know you probably don't anyway, just believe it because Rose and I say it. But be aware of the bias in your newsfeed. Somebody posted a clip, we talked about this, of 2 physicians in California who were saying they've done their research. I'm doing that in quotation marks. They have done some research, and they're saying we need to lift all of the restrictions. Our numbers show there's no reason for this. So people were sharing that in my social media circles, and I did say, okay, so this gives us a picture of one small area in California, and it also they don't say this, but they they do say that they have a couple of hospitals or clinics or whatever, so they're business people, and I bet their business is down because people aren't coming in as much because they're being encouraged to stay home. So I question the orientation of people who are posting.
It's really hard. We're living in a really difficult time right now because you have to be cynical about everything. And who wants to live their life like that? But if you do not, the danger is that you will succumb to misinformation.
Right. I mean, we all probably do. Let's just admit it. We do.
Yes.
But
Yep.
just so you know, Rose and I make no money off of this podcast. So.
Unfortunately, it is a labor of love, and it's a big labor.
So you can count on us to be completely unbiased. That's what we're saying, right, Rose? And I'm saying that tongue in cheek. So our standard action tip is do your research as much as possible without making yourself crazy. Or maybe the best thing is just turn off your computer, go outside, and go for a really long walk, which is what I'm going to do after this.
Yep.
And Rose, our sanity tip is
take time. Just take time. Take space. Hold space. Let it go. Breathe.
Yeah, there is darkness out there, and we're not denying that this is a dark time, but know that there is also light.
Mm-hmm.
And try and stay in touch with that light when the darkness feels like it's going to overwhelm you. All right. Thanks for listening, folks.
Try to stay sane. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.